Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming this evening, and hello to everyone on the live webinar. Thank you for joining us. Like Danny said, I have one son. His name is Jacob. He is 17 months old, and we, over the last 6 months, have kind of developed our own kind of sleep routine, and it's definitely a challenge, but a great learning experience for myself as a pediatrician to be able to kind of review different kind of techniques with families as well. And so I'm hoping to kind of go over a few things, just kind of overview of what we'll talk about tonight. We'll kind of just start off talking about what are the normal sleep cycles, and then kind of going over kind of normal sleep patterns for kind of the different age groups, starting with kind of newborns kind of all the way up through teenagers. All right. So kind of starting off, we teach our kids, lots of things, and even from your first day home from the hospital, you really, are teaching them something every day, whether you realize it or not, and kind of setting these example, going over your sleep routine, kind of starting that early on, is a big thing that you're teaching your kid, whether you realize it or not, and kind of really setting that nurturing environment and a comfortable atmosphere will help you, both you and your child, get a good night's rest. So why is sleep so important? And so there's lots and lots of reasons. It gives your kid better attention span so they can do better in school the next day. They have better memory so they can also learn better. And sleep is very, very much tied into behavior problems. When I do a lot of my ADHD evaluations, one of the big questions I always ask is, what is your child's sleep routine and how much sleep are they getting at night? Because that does play a big part in their ability to focus and learn at school, and again, plays a big part in behavior. And also just sleep itself is your body's way of healing and recovering and whatever stresses it goes through in that day, that nighttime is your body's way of healing. So not only is it good for behavior and mental health, but also your physical health as well. So here are the different stages of sleep, and your body goes through several cycles of these every night, and then both during an infant through adulthood. And the amount of time in the different stages kind of varies depending on how old your child is. But the first stage is when your child is starting to get sleepy, their muscles kind of start to relax. They might have a few little jerks here and there, and that leads into stage 2, where they're actually asleep, but it's just a light sleep. They're easily aroused, but still having kind of regular breathing. The next stage is stage 3, and this is where they're in a very deep sleep, and it's usually hard to awaken them. And then stage 4 is the deepest of all the sleeps. There's no movement of the eyes, muscles. They're just kind of like this limp doll in your arm if you're holding them kind of thing. And if they are awakened at this stage, they're extremely groggy. And then the last stage is REM sleep, which is your rapid eye movement. And during this stage is really when all of the dreams are actually happening. Some kids may awaken at this phase and some not, but no muscle movement. Really the only movement is really the eyes, and so that's where they get the term rapid eye movement. And then after the REM phase, it kind of goes back through kind of stage 2 and 3, and it kind of cycles through several times throughout the night. And again, this is a pattern that, even as adults we go through. It's just the amount of time you spend in each stage varies depending on age. Okay, so we'll kind of start off in the beginning as a newborn. So how much sleep on average does a newborn have? And it's really anywhere on average between 14 to 16. But remember, even when I'm kind of giving numbers kind of throughout the talk, these are just averages. They're not absolutes. And know that each child kind of has their own sleeping pattern. And so some are sleep more than others, some are better sleeper than others. And just because one certain technique works for one doesn't necessarily work for the other. So just kind of keep that in mind as well as we kind of talk about things. But on average, newborns anywhere between 14 to 16 hours in a given kind of 24-hour period. And again, newborns oftentimes have kind of an opposite sleep-wake cycle when they're first born. Because in utero, while you're, physically active during the day, it's hard for, the infant to move around in the uterus, whereas, when mom's sleeping at nighttime and resting, then the baby's a little bit more active. You can feel them kicking probably a little bit more. And so for them, their kind of days, so to speak, are when you're sleeping at nighttime. And so when they're first born, their kind of sleep-wake cycles are often backwards. But most newborns are not going to sleep for, an extended period of time. And newborns actually spend the most amount of time during REM sleep of all the age times. And, as our parents, we want to really help our babies really learn how to sleep well. And really, most kids are not going to start sleeping, quote, I say sleeping through the night, meaning an extended period of time beyond just, 2 or 3 hours. Is not going to really happen until, anywhere from 2 to 4 months of age. And so really, when you're kind of looking at all of the different techniques and books that are out there about helping learn how to get your baby to sleep through the night, you have to really kind of think of, what is your ideal goal? Is it to have a well and rested baby? Is it to have, well-rested parents? Ideally, you want both. You want your child to be well-rested, but also yourself. And ideally, we want a child who is not going to throw a fuss and be really, crying all the time at nighttime, and also a child that is hopefully going to stay in their own bed or crib. And so kind of our end goal is to help our babies sleep through the night in their own crib or bed. And if they do wake up, our goal is to help them learn to soothe themselves back to sleep so they're not always requiring comfort from a parent. So there's lots of different methods, many books out there. The Ferber method is probably the most commonly known, and I have a slide a little bit later on where we'll get into a little bit more detail. But there's the last 4 there: Baby-Wise, Secrets of the Baby Whisperer, No Cry Sleep Solution, and Healthy Sleep Habits, Happy Child, are also other books that are out there that kind of go over different techniques to help your child sleep. I have read the Baby-Wise book, and it is kind of a stringent regimen. It kind of focuses on the parent having more control and setting a child's eat, sleep, wake, play cycle kind of thing, as opposed to the infant kind of dictating when they want to eat and sleep. And my honest opinion in reading some of it, I thought was kind of unrealistic, because they were expecting an 8-week-old to sleep anywhere from 7 to 8 hours, which I've yet to really see an 8-week-old sleep that long. So there were some things in the book that I thought were helpful, but I thought overall still kind of some unrealistic expectations. And the other books I haven't fully read through, but did get a little bit more information about. But the No Cry Sleep Solution kind of focuses more on really getting to know your baby's personality and demeanor and what their own kind of their own sleep-wake cycle, feeding cycle is. And so really, there's no one specific book that is the be-all, end-all. This is the best method. It's more of finding maybe even a combination of different techniques that work for you. And know that just because one method worked for your mom or your friend or your aunt, it may not work for you. And it's kind of finding that one cycle that really that works for your home. Okay, but the kind of overlying theme despite the different, little details, is really making sure that there's consistency between your routines every day, which, includes starting off your sleep routine kind of around the same time each night, and kind of have consistent things. So whether it's bath time, stories, songs, massage, and kind of creating a calming environment where the lights are dim, talking in a low tone voice, and trying to kind of avoid activities that are more stimulating. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well a little bit later on. So let's talk a little bit about the sleep environment itself. So specifically for infants and newborns, you want to make sure the mattress is nice and firm. No extra pillows or blankets or crib bumpers. And all of those things basically increase your risk for sudden infant death syndrome. Sleep sacks are great, but I find that kids either love them or hate them. My son loved them till he was about 2 or 3 weeks old, and then he didn't want to sleep in them at all. So for some kids, they work great, and some, will stay in the sleep sack until they're 6, or 8 months. Each kid is a little bit different on what they like. Oftentimes, a darker, quiet room will be helpful, but some kids do require some background noise, whether it's a fan or something that is just there other than just quiet itself. In the pacifier, there's pros and cons. One of the good things is that there have been lots of studies that show that also decreases your risk for sudden infant death syndrome as well. But then some kids become dependent on it to fall asleep and can make it really hard to get rid of the pacifier later on as well. So I could go either way. My son loves his. We're not quite at the point where we've fully gotten rid of it at bedtime, but it certainly has been part of our sleep routine. So eventually we'll have to fully wean that out as well. But just know that there are pros and cons. And if you never introduce a pacifier, that's okay too. Some kids don't even want it. So again, it's kind of more of, what does your child like? Is it soothing? Is it calming for them? And it is okay to use a pacifier for sure. And then also, laying your infant on back to sleep has been actually the biggest intervention that has decreased the incidence of sudden infant death syndrome. A lot of families will ask me, well, when is it okay for them not to sleep on their back when they're sleeping? And my rule of thumb is once your child has really learned to roll front to back and back to front and has good head control and is able to turn their head, to the side when they are laying on their stomach, that it's okay. We still recommend laying them on their back to sleep when you put them to sleep, but if in the middle of the night they roll over on their stomach, you don't need to go in there and roll them back on their bed. Okay, so here is a little bit about the Ferber method, and really it's not recommended to really start using this until you've reached about 4 months of age, because really, it's not realistic to really expect your child to start sleeping through the night until at least 4 months of age. And what you do is you go through your basic bedtime routine, whether it's, taking a bath, brushing your teeth, reading a book, and then bedtime, you come up with your own bedtime routine. And essentially you place them in their crib and basically leave the room. Most babies, I can guarantee you every baby will cry the very, first several nights that you do this for sure. And the goal of this method is to return to soothe the child, but at gradually increasing intervals. And so really the first night they recommend giving the child at least 3 minutes, then extend it to 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes after that until they've essentially kind of cried themselves to sleep or soothed themselves to sleep. And this, will obviously not happen within a day or two. It may be, several days or even a week before they might kind of learn to essentially put themselves to sleep. And kind of each successive night, you extend the length of time between going in to soothe the child. And there can be kind of variations on your soothing. So for some, it may be going in the room, petting them on the head and saying, Mommy or Daddy loves you, you're okay. And kind of each time you go back, maybe not being quite as, so that first time you go in and you pet them, but the second time maybe you come in and just stand at the foot of the bed and so they hear your voice. Then the third time just standing at the door. So it's a gradual, you're gradually decreasing the amount of attention you're giving them each time you go back to reassure them that you're there, kind of thing. And for most kids, doing this method actually, even though the days that you go through doing it can be hard, in the long run actually work really well. And most kids end up being able to put themselves to sleep. Also important to lay your infant down when they are drowsy or sleepy, but not asleep. The goal is for them to fall asleep while they are in their crib and have that crib be their last image. And the idea behind that is so that if they do wake up during the middle of the night, they'll at least recognize that they're in the same environment that they fell asleep in. Whereas if you rock them to sleep in your arms and then lay them in the crib, when they wake up, they're expecting to still be in your arms to see your face, and it scares them that they're not in that same environment. And so that's really the goal behind having them fall asleep in their crib, so that when they do wake up, they're in a familiar environment. And for most kids, it's not 5 minutes, they're asleep. Most kids will take up to 20 to 30 minutes to actually fall asleep completely, and that's very normal. And it's normal for kids to wake up even 2 or 3 times during the middle of the night as they go through those different stages of sleep, especially when they're kind of in that stage 2 where they're easily arousable. Any small noise, whether it's the wind or lightning or the TV downstairs, that little bit could even wake them up a little bit when they're in that stage of light sleep. And ideally, we want them to be able to fall back asleep after that. We all know that there will still be times when there's kind of that, quote, no point of return, meaning they're screaming, they're crying, there's just no way they're going to get themselves back to sleep. And it will happen more than once for sure. And at that point, obviously, the only thing you can do is go in and obviously pick them up, console them. But ideally, still, once they've calmed down, place them back in the crib as well. And again, consistency is really going to be the biggest thing. One other thing that you can do to help your child sleep a little bit more at nighttime is to not let your child go more than 3 hours of sleeping at a time during the daytime. And the idea behind that is that with keeping them awake a little bit more during the daytime, it will make them a little bit tired so that they sleep more at nighttime. So I always recommend in my newborns from the beginning, I tell families don't let them sleep more than every 3 hours between feedings during the daytime, because that will help them to start switch their sleep-wake cycle. Also, as you get to that 2 to 4 month time frame, really making those nighttime feedings very brief, very boring, and so feed them. If they need their diaper changed, do that quickly and put them right back to bed. Again, to limit that stimulation during the nighttime, it makes it a little bit easier to start weaning those feedings as they get a little bit older. And as I discussed earlier, it's really not expected to have a child sleep through the night. At the earliest, maybe 4 months, but for most, it's closer to that 5 to 6 month age. So I have a lot of families ask me, well, how much should my child be sleeping? And again, always keep in mind that each child is different, and there's always a spectrum, a continuum of how much sleep a child needs. But on average, for a kid, 6 to 9 months, most will have 2 to 3 naps a day, and variable in length. Some 45 minutes, some even as long as 2 hours. And there's some kids that really just do little small cat naps throughout the day. And that's also very normal too. As they get older, usually around 2 naps a day at 1 year to 15 months, and anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, and then from 18 months to sometimes as long as 4 years, they still need kind of that afternoon nap. But again, really variable. Some only nap for an hour, some can nap even all the way up to 3 hours. But usually by the time they're ready for kindergarten, which is at age 5, they've kind of for sure dropped that afternoon nap. I always like to remind my families to be prepared for setbacks. There are going to be certain times, especially in development, where kids are much more aware of their surroundings. And they've developed also new motor skills, so especially cognitive awareness. So they're finally aware of, oh, I'm in unfamiliar place or I'm around strangers, can affect their ability. But once they learn how to sit up on their own and to pull up to a stand in their crib, those can also be a little bit more challenging for sleeping as well. Other setbacks, moving into a new home or a new environment, or like traveling, staying at family's house. Always very difficult, because again, they're being introduced to a new environment, and so that's always going to make falling asleep much more difficult. So always keep that in mind as well. And again, routines are going to be your best friend. Common theme here, as you can see. So toddlers, about 12 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. Again, that one nap in the afternoon. But also around this age is when you may start to see a little bit of nightmares and night terrors. We'll talk about the difference between those two. And also, as you get kind of closer to age 3, some kids will actually start to have nighttime walking as well, which can also be more of a safety issue. So we'll talk about that as well. So again, routines and not following a routine can really make for a bad night sometimes. As they get a little bit older, sometimes having a transitional object such as a blanket or a specific stuffed animal that they're really attached to can also be part of your routine at nighttime. And the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends waiting until at least 12 months of age to really introduce those objects, mainly because of their associated risk with sudden infant death syndrome. Okay, so other things that you can kind of incorporate in your routine, so bath, brushing teeth, stories, songs, and then kind of lights out kind of thing. And in our a little bit older kids, sometimes putting it in writing or in pictures also can be an important thing too. So when is the time to switch over from being in a crib to an open bed or a toddler bed? And really the best time is once your child is actually able to climb out of the crib. That's for sure when you need to switch over, just because it's more of a safety thing. And you know, that's also a huge change for them. And so again, that's a time where you can have setback in sleeping patterns and consistency. And the main thing is returning your child to the bed each time they get out to wander, and keeping those interactions short and boring, and limiting the amount of tension that you're giving them, because that's really what they're looking for when they're getting up out of bed, is your attention. And if they do start having any nighttime walking, safety is going to be your biggest thing. So if your bedrooms are upstairs, making sure that you have a gate at the top of the stairs. And for some kids, or even putting like a gate at the doorway to their bedroom sometimes is necessary as well. So night terrors specifically are a type of arousal disorder where the kid will all of a sudden in the middle of the night just get up and they will just be screaming. Top of their lungs, you'd think that somebody was in there attacking them in their room kind of thing. But eventually they go back to sleep, and the following morning the kid has no idea what happened. You ask them, do you remember what happened last night when you were screaming? They have no idea, no memory of the event at all. It's happened. It's very frequent, and it's just a phase that they usually outgrow. Most likely is going to happen in the first third of the night. And main thing is you don't want to try to awaken the child and try to get them to wake up kind of thing. It's one of those things where they just kind of work themselves through it. They fall back asleep. They have no issues falling back asleep. Again, the rest of the night is usually uneventful without any problems. And like I said, they have no memory of the event at all. Just in the moment itself, when the child is screaming in terror, it's hard as a parent to witness it. We don't really know, it just happens. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nightmares, on the other hand, again, as we talked about earlier, happen during that REM sleep cycle. And these kids actually do remember. And that is the main difference between a nightmare and a night terror. Well, it may actually present the same way, but the nightmare, the child will actually remember the following morning. And the best thing to do for that is reassurance, consoling them. And oftentimes if they're having dreams of a certain monster or somebody in the closet, kind of having that, search, let's check the closet, let's check under the bed kind of thing, kind of before bedtime as part of your nighttime routine sometimes can also be helpful. Some kids like to have like a little flashlight with them next to their bed just in case they do wake up in the middle of the night, kind of thing. Nighttime awakenings, they will happen. It's just a matter of time. And the best thing really is to help your child get back into their own bed. I know a lot of times it's easy just to say, hey, put them in bed with us. But in the long run, that can make things a lot harder because once they have come into the bed, it is much harder to get them out of the bed. And so ideally, the best thing is to get them back in their own bed and make sure that they are comfortable in their bed is really the best thing to do. Okay. So now we kind of move to the next age group, so kind of our school age kids. So kind of your kind of kindergarten through kind of, I don't know, 4th or 5th grade. And these kids need about 10 hours of sleep to really get a thorough night's sleep to be effective at learning the next day at school. Again, still continuing those bedtime routines, but certainly okay to allow a little bit later bedtime. So instead of a bedtime at 7:30 or 8, bedtime at 8:30 or 9 is certainly okay. But most common problems at this age is kind of fear with falling asleep. So fear of stranger, fear of being alone in the dark. And their kind of imagination is really starting to run wild at this age too. And so kind of one of the best things is talking to your child, is seeing what are their fears so that you know what to address as far as what is causing their sleep problems. So some things that you can do is kind of, reassure your child that, they're safe. There's only family here in the home. You can maybe make an agreement to check on the child every, hour until you go to sleep or at your own bedtime. But sometimes doing little things here and there to give your child a little bit more control in a certain setting. So have them decide, do they want a nightlight on? Do they want their closet door open or shut? Do they... any little thing to give them that little extra control can make the nighttime routine a little bit easier. And then sometimes even offering rewards for, going a full week, staying in their bed each night can be helpful as well. So I always talk with family about having good bedtime hygiene and sleep hygiene. And for me, that main thing is making sure best thing is not having a TV in the child's room or a computer, because both of those are very stimulating and can prolong a child's ability to fall asleep. And limiting the amount of exposure to that before bedtime. So ideally, within 30 minutes before bedtime, you want to kind of shut the TV off, shut computer screens off, and really kind of focus on winding down, calming the brain so that when they do lay in bed, they're actually physically able to fall asleep. And also limiting caffeine intake. For most kids, obviously we don't recommend a big caffeine intake anyways, but especially in the afternoon and evening, really kind of, we basically don't recommend it at all because it can be very stimulating and making it difficult to fall asleep. Just a few words about sleep apnea. I'm actually seeing it a little bit more commonly now in the last few years, but prevalence is somewhere around 3%. In adults, it's fairly common, usually more associated with overweight, but for kids, it can be either due to large tonsils or just poor tone in the airway itself. And you can see sleep apnea in kids, and that for sure will affect their ability to have a good night's sleep and thus affect their ability to stay awake and learn and focus and even sometimes have behavior issues during the daytime. The peak age that we see it in childhood is between 3 and 7. And what happens is that either the tonsils that are really large or the floppy airway lead to airway obstruction. So you're not getting air in or out, even though they're trying to breathe. And then that airway obstruction leads to waking up. And so that interrupts that normal sleep cycle that they're going through. And signs that can be associated with sleep apnea, so snoring. So if your kid snores a ton at nighttime, and seems to be pretty sleepy during the daytime or has lots of behavioral issues, that might be something to look at. Or if you physically, witness your child going through periods of not breathing at nighttime and then kind of startling to awake, that's also a sign of sleep apnea as well. And like I had said, sleep apnea leads to poor sleep, which again leads to poor school performance, behavioral problems as well. So if there's any concerns, definitely bring that up with your child's physician. The best and easiest way to really screen for it, other than also doing an exam, is to also do a sleep study. Then we kind of get to the teen years. And really here you need about 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night. So a little bit less as you get older. But the hard thing about this age is that our normal circadian sleep patterns shift. So at this age, it's very normal and natural to want to stay up later at night and sleep in the morning, which makes it very hard because our school schedules still say you got to start school at 8 a.m. And so it can make it very difficult. So just know that at this age, it's not your child wanting to, be lazy or sleep in, or it's a normal shift in a sleep pattern that every teenager goes through. And unfortunately, it just kind of clashes with how our school schedules go as well. And oftentimes, as they kind of stay up late during the week and have to get up early, they get behind on sleep. And so in order to catch up, they sleep in longer on the weekends. And it's important to really catch up on that sleep because it really allows your body to recover, allows your brain to rest as well. And not getting that sleep or that catch up can lead to lots of problems with mood, even depression, ADHD again as well. So again, sleep is very important for a lot of things. And so even though there's that shift in the circadian sleep pattern, as parents, it's still our job to really help our child adjust their sleeping times so that they can still function and learn at school and kind of do their normal everyday activities. So kind of readjusting their schedule gradually. So this also comes into play, especially summertime, kind of transitioning back into school time. So kind of shifting that bedtime a little bit earlier each night so that they kind of slowly adjust to getting that little bit more sleep each night. Also, still important to limit screen time. So computers, cell phone, TV at that nighttime, even at this age, is still very stimulating to the brain and will interfere with your brain's ability to calm down and relax to fall asleep. Bright lights in the morning can also help. It helps to kind of stimulate to wake up. And as much as we all like caffeine in the morning, I still have my cup of coffee every morning. At this age, we still like to avoid caffeine in the mornings to kind of wake up. And as they adjust from teenager, they get older, and kind of the cycle, they kind of go right where you were. So it's a cycle that we all kind of go through. So hopefully I've kind of given you a few tips to kind of help some problems that you've been having. I don't consider myself any expert in sleeping, but hopefully I've shared a few ideas that will kind of help you kind of set your own kind of sleep schedule routines with your own children at home. So I'm definitely free and open for any questions if you guys have any. Yeah.
With sleepwalking, is it better to wake them up or just scoop them up and put them back in bed?
The best thing is actually just to kind of redirect them back to their bedroom as safely as you can. Really waking them is not going to do anything, and for some it can even kind of startle them and scare them if you do try to wake them up. So really the best thing is just to kind of redirect them back to their room as safely as you can. And if it becomes a chronic issue where they're even like walking out and like there are some kids that will actually walk out the front door and start walking down the street. So some parents even have to like deadbolt their doors. It can be a true safety issue for some kids, but really the best thing is to safely just redirect them back to the room.
Yes, I have some questions from the chat, if that's okay. The first one is, how much sleep does a 9-year-old need? You had mentioned 10 hours for school age. Does that apply for older school age?
Yep. So it's really kind of once they get to high school that you can kind of back off to kind of the 8 hours-ish But yeah, 9-year, I would say definitely still ideally around 10 hours of sleep.
Okay. The second question, the child insists on falling asleep with the television on a timer. Does falling asleep that way affect their REM sleep overnight or their sleep process?
I don't think it'll necessarily affect like the sleep stages that they go through, except that when they're in kind of that, it just kind of depends on when the TV kind of goes off kind of thing. Having the TV just on in the room itself, again, provides that stimulation to the brain, so it may actually, in the long run, kind of prolong their actual ability to fall asleep. But if it's kind of become part of their sleep routine, it may actually, I don't want to say become dependent on it, but if it's become part of their routine, then I guess it's okay. But just know that if they sometimes get to that, stage 2 where they're in that light sleep, kind of before the TV has turned off, there's certainly a possibility that that could wake them up, as opposed to really helping them kind of stay asleep kind of thing.
I have one more. Any advice for transitioning from a crib into a bed for a toddler-aged child?
It's hard. I haven't had to do that yet, so I can't really speak from experience. But again, sticking to that routine as much as you can, and really, they're gonna come out frequently, especially that first transition. So the main thing is, again, redirecting them back to their bed, and being as consistent as you can. Even if they say they want a glass of water and they go to the bathroom, they want all of these things. It's really more seeking your attention. And so, again, the best thing is bringing them back to their bed and saying, it's bedtime. This is where you need to be, and being consistent each time.
Is it better to, like, when they're, say, 2, 3 years old, to keep the door shut or leave it open? Is there...
It's a great question. I don't know that it's ever really been addressed in a study or from like a medical side of thing. I'd probably say it probably goes more with whatever the child is comfortable with. Again, for some kids, they're afraid to be alone in that room, and so having that door open is more of just a comfort kind of thing. I would probably go more with kind of whatever the child kind of prefers or is comfortable with. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is there a certain age where they go from a toddler bed to maybe a bigger bed?
There's no specific, set age where, they're finally old enough for a bigger bed. Again, it's more of when they're showing interest and when you're, maybe they physically have outgrown their toddler bed kind of thing, and what their comfort is. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
What are some ways? We have a 3-year-old who's consistently in our bed in the middle of the night.
4-year-old, right there with you.
Doesn't respond well to, I don't want to say bribes, but the night before, if you stay in your bed all night, maybe you can have a reward. Doesn't really care. Is there ways to overcome that?
It's a great question. Not. Yes. Yes. Great question. And unfortunately, I don't have like a great answer. Have you, I don't know, maybe consider seeing one of your, I don't know if your clinics have a psychologist that may have a little bit better idea as far as kind of different techniques to get them, other than bribery or just kind of being consistent with bringing them back to the bed without having kind of these screaming fits where it kind of disrupts the rest of the household. It may end up just kind of coming down to just kind of physically bringing them back into the room, whether, it might be repeated episodes. And unfortunately, it will probably wake up the other sibling is the only thing. So there's not a whole lot more, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I wish I had a better answer. Yeah.
The 8-month-old still wakes up a couple times, so we're trying to work on sleep training him right now. So it's like you wake up with the 8-month-old, then the 3-year-old wakes up, then the 8-month-old, and it's like, we just need to sleep.
Yes.
Like,
I totally feel your pain. Yeah, it makes it a very difficult situation. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Another question from the chat. Do you have an ideal bedtime for a preschooler? 7, 8, 9?
So ideally, I would say for sure by about 8. Yeah.
I know you asked about the terrors earlier, but like the nightmares that they, I'm just wondering, I mean, we're real careful about him not seeing anything, scary on TV. And so I'm trying to figure out where this stuff even comes from. You know what I mean? Because I feel bad, sometimes you'll hear him kind of like crowd. He doesn't like, it's not the terror thing, it's more like the nightmare thing. And it's not super bad, but it's just a little bit. And it's like, I just feel bad because it's like, why are you, where's it coming from?
Usually it's just more of kind of their imagination, kind of their subconscious. Even if they, haven't watched a scary movie or anything in particular where it kind of triggered that specific thought, sometimes it just happens, even if they've never been exposed to it. And it's just more of their imagination, subconscious thoughts coming out kind of thing. I mean, we see it with every kid, regardless of whether they've been exposed to a scary movie or not. They all kind of have that fear of a monster or stranger or somebody coming after them kind of thing. Yes.
Like night lights, is there one that you recommend, or is there just depend on the child again, or?
That's a great question. There's no studies comparing different types. That may be something that you can maybe have the child pick out themselves as kind of a part of their kind of setting their own routine, or kind of having control over something is picking out their own nightlight and picking out where they want it in the room and when they want it turned on and kind of those kind of things. So kind of incorporating that into their kind of routine and having them kind of pick it out would be a good thing. And that there's nothing to really show that one type is better than the other kind of thing. Great questions. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening.